always fascinates me when holidays. Whoa, hi. Welcome.
Thanks.
Good to see you.
You too.
It always fascinates me when we see different traditions like Passover and Easter lining up. And of course, there are other things that line up, which we'll talk more about. But it's a chance to look at things from different and unique perspectives, which we talk about a lot. And this month, the theme for the month from the mothership is diversity. And I've already spoken about diversity in thought, but I want to talk about diversity of belief, diversity of inclusion. And the outline for this month was submitted by Reverend Christian Sorensen from Seaside Center for Spiritual Living. And I want to start with a quote. Ignoring the beauty and value and uniqueness of different types of people is equivalent to ignoring God and refusing to see all the ways God shows up as humanity. We don't do that with dogs, or flowers, or trees, or clouds, or spices, or nature, or art. So why do we do it with humans? Well, Ernest Holmes has a quote, "Man's three greatest needs are to feel that he is needed, wanted, and loved. To feel that he belongs to the universe in which he lives, and to have an object or objects upon which to shower his affection." And don't dogs do that for us? Give us something to shower with affection. They give it back too. Now, last year I took a class called the Metaphysical Bible. And it was the same Bible that we all use and read. But it really gave me a new perspective on how to look at the stories in the Bible. And looking through a metaphysical lens really now shapes how I look at everything. And I will tell you that this week I changed how I look at the Easter story based on the new lens that I look through with a metaphysical interpretation. So I'm going to call this next section of the talk Tomb Time. Now, many of us have had parts of us killed by someone saying we weren't good enough, we weren't pretty enough, valuable enough, talented enough, and so on. And it feels like we were crucified. Sometimes it may feel as if there isn't a tomb big enough to hold all the parts that have been destroyed through life. So many parts we have allowed to die while we experience this thing called life. Now, the parts of you that have been invalidated, discriminated, humiliated, violated, rejected, misrepresented, betrayed, or otherwise degraded by someone else, that's the crucified part of yourself. But the murderous projection of someone else cannot kill one's soul. Our life is literally a story of being born in love. Then the fear of being different starts to dominate our experience. Sometimes we're perpetrator, sometimes we're victim. But God's response, Spirit's response, and answer to crucifixion is always resurrection. The raising of consciousness or transcendence, that's what we're experiencing. That's why we're here. The ascendancy, as each one of us becomes an ascended master. That healing, healing of the sense of separation is realization of love. This realization can take place with just a pause for a moment from that sense of being attacked. So we remember our connection with the divine, and that creates space for us to ignore what's happening and rise up within our own awareness, in our consciousness. And sometimes these wounds run deep. It takes time for the wounds to heal, the physical to catch up with the elevation of awareness, of consciousness. And we can refer to that time as tomb time. It's when we come back to what life has for us, when we allow ourselves to feel and experience the love, despite appearances, that's when we can rise up, step free from the tomb time. We have that ability. You have the same body, and people in your world who may or may not be the ones attacking you, perpetrating violence and thoughts against you, but you see them and everything differently. You understand from a higher, loving perspective. That's when you've stepped out of the darkness into the light, bringing your gift of love and understanding back to the conscious world. You are the bringer of light. The Christ consciousness within you has been freed. So I'll challenge you. Are you willing to roll that stone away that keeps you in tomb time? It was said by the angel at the tomb when the three women came to pay their last respects, hoping to catch the spirit of Jesus on that third day, the last ritualistic opportunity, when the angel said to them, "He is not here. He has risen." Are you going to remain entombed by a subjective bias or blatant prejudice that tries to keep you in the dark? Or are you going to rely on your greater expression of good and light? What is the stone keeping you in the dark? Today, of all days, is a great day to align with the collective energy of the entire planet. The energy, the consciousness of the planet is ascending through us, as us, and we need to match that. We need to keep it going. Oh. No, I'm not mentioning names, Kelly. Today is a day to align with the collective energy of the planet in awakening from your stoned state and push away that which has kept you dead to your greater expression in life. I almost missed that. And I was so proud of when I put that in. It's about moving that stone out of the way. The stone, not a state of stone. But Dr. Holmes left us a clear understanding of what he believes about immortality in his work called What We Believe. We believe in the eternality, the immortality, and the continuity of the individual soul forever and ever expanding. So that's his version of how you roll away that which has kept you from a greater understanding of the expansiveness of spirit. Now, some of you were here when we had our vernal equinox last full moon ceremony, so it's been a full month. So you're familiar when we talk about the pagan celebrations of the spring and how those have been adapted into the current Easter celebrations. So moving on from tomb time, this is many stories of the one truth. Our own spiritual exploration deepens, not when we give our power away to an event that may or may not have happened thousands of years ago, but through the relevance of the spiritual meaning to each one of us here today. If a transcultural story continues to present itself for 2,000 years, there's a message in there that needs to be known, to be understood. That meaning is worth exploring and integrating. But there's other messages of the same type. Plato's myth of error, in the Republic when the soldier comes back to life, or Jesus' return to tell us that there is no death. Our relevance is in the realization that apparent physical death is not final. It's not final for an expanding soul. And the message of that continuity of life is our story. This doctrine of immortality is ancient. You can find similar, particular mythological similarities of the Jesus story with Persia's Mithra or the Egyptians' Horus. But the concept of coming back to life in the spring is as ancient as humanity's storytelling gets. The Saxon goddess Eostre, for whom Easter was named, later became Ostara, which we talked about at the pagan celebration. Ostara was a fertility goddess with a passion for new life, creation. Her magical companion, the rabbit, a well-recognized rapid reproducer of life, joined her in bringing new life to dying plants. The plants were dead all winter, but in the spring, the miracle of rebirth, renewal takes place. And she offered eggs, which are obvious symbols of fertility. From the Joyous Abundance Journal by Petra Weldis, a well-known CSL minister, the yellow yolk of the egg represents the sun god, while the white of the egg represents the maiden goddess. Breaking through the shell is rich in metaphorical meaning. But let's continue. Take a look at Persephone. Many of us have heard of Persephone, the sweet daughter of goddess Demeter. Persephone was kidnapped by Hades, later became the queen of the underworld. That's where Hades lived. This is actually the story in ancient Greece that they used to explain the change of seasons, the eternal cycle of nature's death and rebirth. Persephone was forced to spend a part of the year with her husband in the underworld. But her annual return to earth, above ground, in the spring was marked by the flowering of the meadows and all the beautiful life that spring brings once again. All these stories are here to remind us we don't die to become immortal. We are immortal now. Our contention is not that a dead person lives again, but that a living person can never die. That's a big difference. A dead person doesn't live again. A living person can never die. That's the lesson. Yet when we encounter other perceptions around these stories, these myths, rather than saying our way is correct and the others are not, we should try inclusion, acceptance, and know the truth is revealed and shared to us when we are open to being receptive to another's perspective. Now I want to share one more little story that illustrates being open to another perspective. A young man went to his psychologist, and the doctor said, "So why are you here?" He said, "All my life, I've been afraid when I go to bed that there's someone under the bed. And it continues today. I'm an adult, I know better. But the minute I lay down, I'm scared to death that there's someone under the bed." And the doctor said, "Oh, okay. We can treat that. If you'll agree to come and see me 3 times a week for about a year, we can help you get over that fear." And the young man said, "Wow, 3 times a week for a year? How much is each visit?" $150. I think I'll sleep on it. So 6 months later, the doctor ran into the young man and he said, "So how are you dealing with your fear?" He said, "Oh, I'm not. I got over that." The doctor said, "Oh, really? How did you get over that?" "A bartender cured me for $10. "A bartender cured you for $10? How did that happen?" He said, "Go home and saw the legs off the bed." "Ain't nobody under there now." And then the young man said, "Yeah, and I did the math. I took the $23,000 I would have paid you and I went out and bought a new truck." So sometimes, the moral of the story here is, sometimes a new perspective can be hugely beneficial. And it doesn't have to come from an acknowledged expert. The expert was the bartender, who we didn't even meet in the story. The expert was the truck salesman who made out. Well, anyway. So be open to different perspectives. You don't know what the benefit will be. We each have our own fears that we have to deal with in our own way. And these different perspectives of how we deal with that can really be the answer that we've been looking for. Sometimes it's wise to get a second opinion. There may be value in looking at things differently. And not everyone's, or even the majority's, opinion is your answer. You have to find your answer. We have free will to follow or ignore anything and everyone who tells us something, including me. Don't believe what I tell you. Turn within, find your own answers. It's your life. Use it to evaluate everything and everyone you encounter, and use your own internal guidance system. Now, literally, this week I changed how I view the Easter story. And this is my perspective, which you can consider and then either think more about it or just let it go. Another way to look at Jesus leaving the tomb is that it's just a metaphor for all of us, that we too survive what appears to be death. I know many of us believe in reincarnation. That should be a pretty good example that we survive death. I want to give you another little story. And this is from James von Prague's book, Adventures of the Soul. And it's a very clear analogy about leaving our body and moving on. When one is scuba diving, when you're underwater, you don't spend the entire time thinking about, how much oxygen do I have left? You have things to help you measure that, but you don't worry about, how much time do I have left? You enjoy the experience. That's why you're there. You know you're going to run out of oxygen at some point. Every one of us is going to run out of oxygen at some point. So, what are you doing while we're in this diving experience? You may be having a great time. You might be just coming up on an interesting shipwreck. When the clock goes off, out of time. Time to go back to the surface. Now, what the surface means to you, I don't know, but I'm sure each of us has a perspective. Now, there's two ways to go about it. Once you have to surface, there's nothing saying you can't put on a new tank and just come right back in. Many of your friends are here. Come right back in. Your soul family's here. Come right back in. It's just part of the experience. Throughout history, humans have looked upon death as something to fear. It's fear of the unknown. It's because God, in infinite wisdom, has awakened our awareness of reality while we're in the depths of the ocean with a finite amount of oxygen, and we don't know what will happen when the tank runs out. We don't remember what the surface is like. We don't know that above the water is our real home. That's where we came from. We have the option. We'll dive with many friends. And when their tank runs out, they have to go. We'll miss them, of course. But when our time is up, we'll see them again. We'll see them topside. The last thing our friends would want for us is to spend the rest of our time mourning their absence. In The Science of Mind, Dr. Holmes says, as the eagle, freed from its cage, soars to its native heights, so the soul, freed from the home of heavy flesh, will rise and return unto its Father's house, naked and unafraid. We are not our bodies. They're marvelous vehicles for us to tootle around on earth in our vibration of awareness. But we are so much more. In the Bible, Paul wrote, there are celestial bodies and bodies terrestrial. All our consciousness isn't crammed into this bag of bones. It's just part of who we are. The metaphysical stories from the beginning of time are to remind us to give up our fear of the death process. You can't die. So choose to live fully now. We'll always be in the now. So when we've chosen life, then we can be a radiant expression of the divine, no matter who we are. The Spirit of God is everywhere. Now, many of us have been fortunate enough to attend classes given by Mr. Randall Monk and Ms. Rana Herman Vizane. And they have a phrase that just struck me, lit me right up the first time I heard it, and I've heard it many times now. They talk about we are divine sparks from the central fires of the universal flame. First time I heard it, it was like, oh, yeah. I've never heard that anywhere else. Shame on me. Does that sound extreme? Divine sparks from the central fires of the universal flame. Can you put your head around that? Ernest Holmes used that exact same language, and I never saw it. He describes the Christ as the Christ consciousness, which is always within each and every one of us. Now I'm going to refer to my very old science of mind and read you a quote. This is Finding the Christ chapter in Science of Mind. The mystic Christ comes from the bosom of the unseen Father, proclaiming the love of God through his own love of humanity. To know God is to love, for without love there is no knowledge of God. As the Christ awakens, the divine spark, shot from central fires of the universal flame, is able to warm other souls by the radiance of its own self-unfoldment. Who knew? I've never come across that before. Has anyone seen that? Sharon, you have?
In Unity. When I was in
Unity.
Unity in Maine, they used to tell us we were divine sparks.
Yeah. He goes on, and I do want to keep going. We give only what we have. The only shadow we cast is of ourselves. This shadow lengthens as we realize the great presence in which we live, move, and have our being. Who would entertain the Christ must invite him. He does not come unbidden, nor sit at any man's table an unwelcome guest. Neither does the divine presence force itself upon any. He stands at the door and knocks. And this is all bold capital letters. We must open if we are to receive. That's the big part. But how can we receive unless we first believe? We must believe that Christ, now that's the Spirit of Christ, indwells our own lives and stimulates all of our actions. For without him, we can do nothing. To realize within oneself a divine presence, a perfect person, is to recognize the Christ. No man ever walks life's road alone. There is another who walks with him. This is his inner self, the undying reality, which his personality but poorly emulates. Let us learn to be still and let the truth speak through us, to be still and know that the inner light shines. Woohoo, Dr. Holmes. Good stuff. So, he goes on, and there was one other line. It's actually the next page. And it's very short, but it's powerful. The world has learned all it should through suffering. We don't need to suffer anymore. We're on a different path. We're on a transcendent, ascendant path. That's where we should be, where we should focus. We should allow that consciousness within to guide us. Whatever form it comes to us in. Animal guides, spirit guides, talking squirrels, Easter eggs that speak. It doesn't matter. Wherever we make that connection, that's our path. So, in summary, feeling entombed by some rough times can happen. But after some tomb time, it's time to come back to life. Cultures from around the world, from time immemorial, have stories, universal stories, about returning to life. The earth plane that we live in is just one stopping place in the continuity of the individual soul. And that soul is forever and ever expanding. So step away from fear. Get into the love that created all things. And get back into the game. Your spiritual path. That's your game. Earlier I said we don't die to become immortal. We are immortal now. Our contention is not that a dead person lives again, but that a living person can never die. When you feel entombed, pressure pounding down on you, you have the power to envision that metaphysical stone rolling away and rise triumphantly back to life. Each one of us, we're already masters. This is our ascension time. That's the story that Master Jesus was revealing to us. Namaste.
Namaste.